They called her the perfect wife, a devoted mother of two, a loving partner, a woman who vanished during a morning jog and reappeared weeks later, bruised, chained, and broken. She said she was kidnapped, tortured, starved, and the world believed her. For a time, she was a symbol of strength, of survival. Her face was on news screens. Her story was shared in prayers, fundraisers, and headlines. But that story, the one everyone rallied behind, wasn't true. And when the truth surfaced, it revealed a hoax so elaborate, so calculated, that it didn't just deceive a nation, it shattered a family, discredited real victims, and exposed just how far someone will go to escape their reality. This isn't a story about survival. It's a story about deception. A woman who built a lie so convincing it fooled federal agents, the media, and the people who loved her most. This is the Sherri Papini Kidnapping Hoax, and this is how it fell apart. It was a normal Wednesday morning in Redding, California, November 2nd, 2016. Sherri Papini, 34 years old, leaves her home just before lunch for what should have been a short jog near the old Sunrise Drive loop, a quiet residential area surrounded by trees, trails, and well-kept homes. She never comes back. Her husband, Keith Papini, returns home from work around 5:08 p.m., expecting to see Sherri and their two kids. Instead, the house is empty, no note, no message. The kids, thankfully, are safe at daycare, but Sherri is gone. Panic sets in. Keith uses the Find My iPhone feature on his phone and tracks her device to the side of a gravel road near the jogging route. He drives there, hoping she simply dropped it or maybe turned an ankle. Instead, what he finds sends chills down his spine. Sherri's cell phone is lying on the ground. Her earbuds are there too, tangled in strands of her long blonde hair. To Keith, it looks like a violent struggle. Something happened here, something bad. Within minutes, he calls 911, and within hours, local authorities from the Shasta County Sheriff's Office launch a search. Helicopters fly overhead. K-9 units scour the woods. Neighbors, volunteers, and family members form search parties. Flyers are printed. Media alerts go out. By morning, the case has hit local news, and within 48 hours, it's national. A young, beautiful mother has gone missing in broad daylight in small-town California. And the only clue? A phone, a set of earbuds, and a few strands of hair. Social media lights up with the hashtag #BringSherriHome. Friends post photos of her smiling with her kids. News anchors talk about her as a devoted mom, a friendly neighbor, and a loving wife. She's described as wholesome, innocent. The kind of woman this just doesn't happen to. Tips begin to pour in. Possible sightings, vague leads, a few phone calls from supposed witnesses. But nothing sticks. The police conduct interviews with everyone close to Sherri, neighbors, co-workers, family. Keith is questioned too, but clears a polygraph test quickly and cooperates fully. His raw grief is undeniable. He appears in TV interviews, breaking down in tears, pleading for his wife's safe return. For 3 long weeks, the case goes nowhere. Investigators dig into Sherri's phone records, financials, and social media. They begin to quietly explore every angle, including the possibility that she wasn't taken by force. But publicly, they treat it as a kidnapping. The tone remains urgent, hopeful, and deeply emotional. Redding, a city known for its quiet streets and close-knit community, is rattled. People leave their porch lights on at night. Women stop jogging alone. The fear spreads fast. If it could happen to Sherri, it could happen to anyone. There are no ransom demands, no suspicious phone calls, no evidence of foul play beyond what was found at the trail. Then, a break. November 24th, 2016. Thanksgiving morning. It's been exactly 22 days since Sherri Papini vanished without a trace. A driver on a rural stretch of County Road 17 near Yolo County, about 140 miles south of where she disappeared, spots a woman on the side of the road. She's injured, waving frantically and wearing only a light sweatshirt and underwear. Law enforcement arrives within minutes. The woman collapses. She's weak, bruised, emaciated, and when they ask her name, she whispers it, Sherri Papini. It's the miracle everyone had been hoping for. She's immediately taken to a hospital for evaluation. Her injuries are extensive. She has bruises on her face and body, marks on her wrists from being restrained, and a branding scar on her right shoulder. Her hair has been hacked unevenly. She's lost weight, around 15% of her total body mass. To the public, it looks like clear evidence of torture, of trauma, of a nightmare come to life. Word spreads fast. News outlets interrupt Thanksgiving coverage to report on the stunning update. Headlines read, Sherri Papini found alive. A missing woman has returned against all odds. In the hospital, she recounts the story. She says she was abducted at gunpoint by two Hispanic women while jogging. She claims they kept her in a room, blinds covered, and forced her to wear a bag over her head. She says she was beaten, starved, and held down as one of them branded her shoulder. She tells investigators they spoke mostly in Spanish, that they played music loudly to drown out her cries. She says they covered their faces. She says she was chained to a pole, threatened, told she'd be sold. According to her, she didn't know why they let her go. One day they put her in a car, drove for hours, and dumped her on the side of the road. The story is horrifying. And almost immediately, it becomes bigger than just a kidnapping case. It becomes a media phenomenon. The community celebrates. Posters that once said missing now say welcome home. Family friends speak to reporters about what a miracle it is. Her husband Keith posts a tearful letter describing the moment he held her again. He describes her as frail, broken, and terrified. He says her children didn't recognize her at first. Public donations flood in to help cover medical bills. Sherri qualifies for over $30,000 in victim compensation funds, granted by the California Victim Compensation Board. She begins therapy, trauma counseling. The story becomes an inspiration. She is, in every way, the perfect victim. But behind the scenes, investigators are starting to whisper, something isn't right. Her account is vague. She's hesitant to provide full details. When asked to help develop composite sketches of her abductors, she refuses. She's unwilling to undergo certain medical evaluations or interviews without long delays. Some of the injuries don't match the timeline. The brand is real, but crude. Her bruises are inconsistent with long-term restraint. There are no defensive wounds, no evidence of repeated violence. More importantly, there are no signs of anyone searching for her. No reports of suspicious vehicles, no DNA, fingerprints, or surveillance footage to support her claims. The police even canvass known traffickers and criminal networks. Nothing matches. Still, the public doesn't know any of this. To them, she's a survivor, and law enforcement keeps quiet. They focus on compassion, not confrontation, for now. But behind closed doors, they begin to shift their focus, and then the lab results come back. DNA has been found on her clothing, male DNA, not her husband's. not anyone connected to the case. For investigators, it's the first real break, and they follow it carefully, quietly, waiting for a match. The story that once inspired hope is beginning to crumble. Sherri Papini's story had captivated the nation. A young mother brutally abducted, held captive, tortured, then miraculously freed. But as investigators continued digging into her claims, they found themselves returning to the same word over and over again: inconsistent. Sherri claimed she was kidnapped by two Hispanic women. She gave vague descriptions. One had thin eyebrows, the other wore hoop earrings. When asked to sit with a sketch artist, she declined. Multiple times, she said she'd been kept in a locked room. But when asked for details, what the room looked like, what it smelled like, where the windows were, her answers became scattered. She claimed she was forced to wear a bag over her head and was chained for weeks, but there were no deep scars or chafing typically left by long-term restraints. Then came the issue of the branding. She had a fresh scar on her shoulder, a crude design not tied to any known gang or trafficking organization. She told authorities the two women branded her as a warning, but she never fully explained what it meant or why they did it. And despite saying she was held in constant darkness, Sherri didn't suffer from the types of disorientation or light sensitivity common in long-term captivity cases. Investigators asked to examine the clothes she wore when she was found. They were oddly clean for someone who just escaped after 22 days of alleged captivity. Medical professionals flagged her injuries too. The bruising was inconsistent with severe physical abuse. She had superficial wounds, but nothing that suggested sustained assault. Her weight loss was significant, but her vitals were stable. And then there was the language. She claimed her captors mostly spoke Spanish, but when asked for phrases she overheard, she couldn't recall any, not even basic ones. She said she was terrified, but she couldn't provide a single name, nickname, or defining trait beyond dark eyebrows and Spanish music. Investigators pressed further. They asked if she had ever seen their faces. She said no. They wore masks. They never let her see them clearly. But one thing was becoming painfully clear. None of the evidence supported her story. There were no surveillance camera sightings of her alleged abductors. No reports of a woman being dragged or forced into a vehicle. No matching vehicles reported in the area at the time of her disappearance. Forensic testing of her clothing and body turned up male DNA. It was found on the sweatpants and on the underwear she was wearing when she was found. And that DNA was the first tangible lead they had. It wasn't her husband's. It wasn't any of her family. It wasn't connected to any known suspect. It was the DNA of an unidentified male, and it had no place in the story Sherri told. Still, the investigators were cautious. The case had received massive public attention. Papini was still seen as a survivor, a mother, a victim of a violent and terrifying crime. They couldn't accuse her without concrete proof. But they could wait. And so behind the scenes, they began building a different kind of case. One that didn't involve masked women or dark rooms, but instead revolved around deception, manipulation, and something far more calculated than anyone had expected. They subpoenaed her phone records, her internet history, her financial data. They looked at past relationships, messages, voicemails. They began constructing a timeline not just of where she might have been, but of who she might have reached out to before she disappeared. And then came the break they needed: a match. The male DNA didn't belong to a stranger. It didn't belong to one of her alleged abductors. It belonged to someone she used to know, an ex-boyfriend. In 2020, nearly 4 years after Sherri Papini first disappeared, investigators finally got the break they'd been waiting for. The male DNA found on her clothing had been submitted to a national database years earlier, but until now, there were no matches. That changed when the profile was matched to a man living in Costa Mesa, California. His name, James Reyes, Sherri's ex-boyfriend. When agents contacted him, he didn't deny knowing Sherri. In fact, what he said changed the entire direction of the investigation. According to Reyes, the story Sherri told the world, the terrifying kidnapping, the masked captors, the torture, wasn't just exaggerated. It was a lie. Reyes claimed that weeks before her disappearance, Sherri had reached out to him through burner phones and secret communication. She told him she was being abused, that she needed to escape, that she couldn't take her life anymore and wanted to disappear. She begged him to pick her up and help her leave everything behind. So he did. He drove from Southern California all the way to Redding, parked near her jogging route, waited. Sherri staged the scene, left her phone and earbuds on the side of the trail, intentionally pulled strands of her hair loose to suggest a struggle, and got into his vehicle willingly. Then they vanished together. Reyes told investigators that Sherri stayed with him for the entire 22 days. She was never restrained, never kidnapped. He said they lived together quietly. She cut her hair. He bought her supplies. She never went outside and told him she couldn't risk being seen. He said she wanted to keep a low profile so no one would find her, but that wasn't all. Reyes told agents that Sherri inflicted injuries on herself. She asked him to brand her with a heated tool. She wanted to look like she had been tortured. She even allegedly hit herself to create bruises. She told him she had to make it convincing. Reyes thought he was helping someone escape a dangerous situation. But what he didn't know was that she planned to return home and tell the world she had been kidnapped by strangers. He never expected to be dragged into a federal investigation. When asked why he went along with it, Reyes said he believed her. He hadn't seen her in years, but when she reached out, he felt sorry for her. She was crying, desperate, saying she feared for her life. He thought he was doing the right thing. He cooperated fully with investigators. He showed them the apartment where she stayed, the receipts, the texts. He even gave them the branding tool, and every detail he shared matched the timeline. He had no motive to lie, no reason to fabricate a story. If anything, he had risked his own freedom by harboring her. But what mattered most was this. His version made more sense than hers. Now the FBI had a real case. They had a DNA match, a witness confession, a completely different story from the one Sherri had been telling for nearly 4 years. And it was all supported by evidence, but they didn't arrest her right away. They waited. They wanted more. They reanalyzed Sherri's communications. They found she had purchased burner phones to contact Reyes, phones she never disclosed during the investigation. She had sent messages to him well before the abduction, laying the groundwork for the plan. They reviewed the $30,000 in victim assistance funds she had received, the donations, the therapy bills, the sympathy she had collected while pretending to be a survivor. It wasn't just a lie, it was fraud, and it was federal. The once admired mother, the supermom from Redding, California, had crafted an abduction tale so convincing it fooled everyone, her family, her town, and the nation. But it was coming to an end. March 3rd, 2022. Nearly 6 years after the world first heard Sherri Papini's name, federal agents knock on her door. She's no longer the glowing supermom the public once adored. Now she's the target of a federal investigation. She's arrested outside her home and charged with 2 felonies, making false statements to federal law enforcement and mail fraud. Within hours, the headlines are everywhere. Sherri Papini arrested for faking her own kidnapping. To the public, it feels like whiplash. The same woman once called brave, inspiring, and strong is now being accused of one of the most elaborate hoaxes in recent history. According to the federal affidavit, Papini lied to FBI agents multiple times over the years, repeated false claims about her imaginary captors, and knowingly submitted to interviews she knew were based on fiction. But the charges go even deeper. Investigators revealed that Papini received over $30,000 in payments from the California Victim Compensation Board, claiming expenses for therapy, ambulance rides, and personal trauma, all based on a crime that never happened. They also highlight the thousands of dollars spent in public resources, search efforts, man-hours, forensic testing, and multi-agency investigations, all chasing shadows that Papini had invented. She's released on a $120,000 bond. Cameras follow her every move as she leaves the courthouse, head down, hair over her face, the image of shame. Her attorney enters a not guilty plea, but the evidence is overwhelming. FBI agents had timelines, phone records, DNA evidence, a full confession from James Reyes. Surveillance showing her absence from public life wasn't due to imprisonment. It was because she was hiding. Weeks later, the pressure becomes too great. In April 2022, Sherri Papini pleads guilty to both charges. In a written statement, she admits to staging her disappearance, lying to authorities, and accepting funds under false pretenses. She says she's sorry. She apologizes to law enforcement, to her community, and to her husband and children, but for many, it's too little, too late. The damage has already been done. Prosecutors push for prison time. They argue this wasn't a one-time panic or impulsive mistake. It was a calculated fraud, maintained for years through lie after lie. In September 2022, Papini is sentenced to 18 months in federal prison, followed by 36 months of supervised release. She's also ordered to pay $309,902 in restitution, repaying the costs of the false investigation and the public funds she received. For someone who was once embraced as a victim, the fall is steep and final. Her husband, Keith, had stood beside her through everything. He spoke on her behalf to reporters, advocated for her recovery, and shielded her from critics. But now, he files for divorce. In court documents, he describes the emotional devastation of discovering the truth. He explains how her lies not only destroyed their marriage, but also put their children in the center of a public spectacle built on fiction. He requests sole custody of their kids, citing irreparable trust and emotional harm. The court agrees. And just like that, the family she claimed to protect is shattered. Sherri begins her prison sentence in late 2022. She's no longer a hero, no longer a survivor. Just another name in a long list of infamous hoaxers. But the story isn't over. By the time Sherri Papini steps behind bars, the story that once inspired a nation has become a symbol of betrayal. For the people of Redding, California, the emotions are raw. Neighbors who once tied yellow ribbons to trees now tear them down. The community that organized candlelight vigils and donated to GoFundMe accounts feels humiliated, betrayed, used. And the ripple effect doesn't stop with hurt feelings. Real victims begin to speak out. Advocates for missing persons and survivors of abduction raise a painful concern. Cases like Sherri's don't just steal resources, they steal credibility. They make the public skeptical. They make police departments more cautious. They make juries ask, is this real? When someone fakes a crime this convincingly and gets away with it for years, it chips away at public trust. And real victims pay the price. The law enforcement agencies involved express similar frustration. The Shasta County Sheriff's Office estimates hundreds of man-hours were poured into the original search. Tips were followed, search crews deployed, helicopters launched, all based on a lie. The FBI had spent years sifting through false leads and dead ends. Multiple interviews, DNA testing, surveillance reviews, all wasted. And taxpayers? They footed the bill. Over $300,000 in restitution doesn't begin to cover the indirect costs, especially the emotional toll on those who felt responsible for bringing Sherri home. But while the world reacts to the truth, one group suffers in silence: her children. For years, they believed their mother had been hurt, taken, abused. They were shielded from media coverage, protected from the gruesome details. But the emotional imprint of that time, those 22 days of fear, never went away. Now they learn the truth. Their mother wasn't taken. She left. And worse, she hurt herself to make it look real. Keith Papini, now a single father, does his best to insulate them from the headlines. He tells the court he has no words to explain how deeply this has affected them. He says he believed in his wife. He trusted her. He watched her cry and struggle to reintegrate after her abduction. He stayed up with her at night when she had supposed nightmares. He defended her when people doubted. And all along, she knew the truth. In court filings, he calls it a betrayal so deep it feels endless. Even after her guilty plea, Sherri never fully explains why she did it. No clear motive is offered. No diagnosis. No full admission beyond the legal minimum. She apologizes, yes, but never unpacks the why. Speculation fills the void. Some believe she was desperate for attention, trapped in a life she didn't want, yearning for escape. Others suggest deeper mental health struggles, possible narcissism, a personality disorder, dissociation, even Munchausen syndrome. But no matter the theory, one fact remains. She chose to disappear. She chose to lie. And she chose to maintain that lie for nearly 6 years. In the weeks following her sentencing, media coverage shifts tone. It becomes less about the crime and more about the psychology behind it. How does someone fake a kidnapping for 22 days? How does someone physically injure themselves, stage a crime scene, and keep it going for years? Experts weigh in, calling the hoax textbook manipulation. They point out how she crafted the perfect victim narrative, complete with vague suspects, dramatic injuries, and tearful homecomings. She said just enough to draw sympathy, but never enough to be disproven quickly. It was brilliant in its cruelty, and it worked, until it didn't. Meanwhile, documentaries, podcasts, and interviews begin production. Sherri Papini's name joins the ranks of infamous hoaxers, right alongside Jussie Smollett and the Balloon Boy parents. But even among that list, Sherri stands out, for one reason. She never wanted fame. She wanted disappearance. Most hoaxes chase attention, cameras, spotlights. But Sherri Papini's lie was rooted in something else. Escape. She didn't stage a crime to rise. She staged it to disappear. And when that failed, she turned the lie into her new identity. Even as the truth spread, many still wondered if this was really the end of her story. They wouldn't have to wait long for an answer. Just when the story seemed to be over, Sherri Papini came back into the spotlight. It was early 2025. News broke that she had agreed to participate in a docuseries. People were stunned. The woman who had been convicted of faking her own kidnapping, the woman who had admitted it in federal court, was now speaking out publicly. But it wasn't just an apology tour. She was rewriting the story. In the first interview released, Sherri claimed she had been misunderstood. She said she was a traumatized woman in crisis, trapped in a failing marriage, emotionally overwhelmed, and mentally unstable. And then she dropped the bombshell. She said the kidnapping was real, not the version she had first told police, about 2 Hispanic women and a bag over her head. That story, she admitted, was a cover. But according to Sherri, the man who actually took her, James Reyes, wasn't acting under her request. She claimed he had manipulated her. That she had reached out for emotional support, yes. But what followed wasn't consensual. She described being coerced into staying with him. She said he kept her isolated, emotionally controlled, and eventually branded her against her will. She presented herself not as a hoaxer, but as a misunderstood victim who had told the wrong story out of fear. She insisted she was too ashamed to admit the truth, that she had run to a man from her past and been held in a toxic, abusive situation. The new version was softer, more complex, carefully phrased. But there was one big problem. None of it matched the evidence. James Reyes, contacted again after the docuseries announcement, firmly denied every claim. He said everything was voluntary, that Sherri had asked him to pick her up, and that she had stayed at his apartment willingly. He had no motive to hurt her. He said he was shocked that she'd twist the story again, especially after pleading guilty. Federal investigators were equally skeptical. They pointed out that Sherri had confessed under oath to staging the kidnapping, that she had lied to the FBI, that her own digital communications proved premeditation, burner phones, secret messages, and weeks of coordination before she vanished. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a spontaneous escape. It was a planned deception. Still, the docuseries drew attention. People tuned in, curious to see how far she would go to reframe her narrative. Was she trying to clear her name? Or just trying to stay relevant? Psychologists and media critics weighed in. Some said this was classic behavior, a hoaxer trying to preserve some piece of control over their legacy. Others believed Sherri couldn't face the shame of what she'd done, so she created a version where she wasn't the villain. But no matter how compelling the camera work, the public had heard enough. Comments poured in. You had your chance. Stop talking. Real victims don't get to make second drafts. What was once a national mystery had become a cautionary tale, not just about lying, but about doubling down on a lie, even after the truth is undeniable. In the end, Sherri's rewrite didn't change the facts. It didn't restore her reputation, and it didn't convince the people who had followed her story from the beginning. If anything, it confirmed what many already believed, that Sherri Papini wasn't looking for healing. She was looking for control over the narrative, over the memory, over how she'd be remembered. But no version of the story, not the original, not the rewritten one, could undo the damage she caused, because her hoax didn't live in the headlines. It lived in the lives she disrupted, the people she hurt, the trust she broke. And that damage, unlike her story, couldn't be edited. By 2025, nearly a decade after her staged disappearance, Sherri Papini had become something more than a headline. She had become a cautionary tale. Because when the public first heard her name, it was tied to one of their greatest fears: a woman vanishing during a routine jog. No warning, no explanation, just gone. And when she was found, bloodied and broken, they exhaled in relief. A survivor, a miracle, a mother who made it home. But when the truth came out, when investigators peeled back the layers of her story, it revealed a far more uncomfortable reality. It was all fake. And it worked. For weeks, she had the country's attention. For years, she maintained the lie. She received sympathy, donations, government funds, counseling, and support. She had thousands of people believing her, fighting for her, praying for her. And then she admitted it never happened. The lie was calculated, deliberate, maintained over nearly 6 years, and the cost? It was staggering. Not just financially, though over $300,000 in wasted public funds is no small figure. Not just legally, though 18 months in prison is a serious consequence. The true cost of the lie was deeper, more lasting. It was the doubt it created. Because for every real victim who comes forward, there are now more questions, more scrutiny, more suspicion. Is this another Papini situation? Is she making this up? Do we really know what happened? Victims of domestic abuse, missing persons, survivors of trafficking. Their stories became harder to tell in the wake of hers. Not because they were less true, but because one woman made falsehood look so convincing. Law enforcement felt it too. Investigators spent years chasing ghosts, wasting resources that could have gone to real cases. Search teams combed through forests. Crime analysts reviewed footage. Experts tested DNA. None of them were chasing a criminal. They were chasing a narrative built by a woman who simply wanted out. And what about her family? Keith Papini lost more than a wife. He lost trust, confidence, a sense of stability for his children. He stood by her side, he defended her, and she let him. Their kids, now growing older, have to live with the legacy of her choices. They watched their mother become a national icon, then a national punchline. They watched their father crumble under the weight of betrayal. They watched their names pulled into documentaries and headlines, and none of it was their fault. The community? They moved on, but not without scars. Reading became a symbol, a town that rallied behind a fraud, a town that grieved a lie. And Sherri? She served her time. She told her second story, but she never truly explained the why. Maybe she never will. And maybe that's the final piece of damage her hoax left behind. Unanswered questions, lingering doubt, a shadow that stretches beyond the crime itself. In the end, it wasn't just a lie, it was a betrayal, one that cost time, money, faith, and trust. And the weight of that betrayal doesn't fade when the headlines do. She was once called the perfect wife, then the perfect victim. Now, Sherri Papini is remembered for something else entirely, not for surviving a crime, but for creating one. Her lie wasn't just a headline, it became a mirror, reflecting how easily we trust, how quickly we rally behind a story, and how devastating it is when that trust is broken. One staged abduction, one global spotlight, and one truth that shattered it all. This is the Sherri Papini story, and it's not just about what she did, it's about what it cost. If you want more deep dives into true crime stories that shocked the world, exposed deception, and changed lives, subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss what's coming next. Because sometimes the lies are louder than the truth.